Right now is the reassignment with the street crime unit.
Correct.
I guess North and Central. It's not a lot of officers,
No.
I mean, overall.
Mm-hmm.
But why is this happening, and what's going to be lost as a result?
So the precinct commanders are given the task of running their precincts as they have the needs, right? So if you look at our precincts, each are very different and they address very different things. So the commanders of both Central and North have realized that their calls for service are increasing, and that they had these officers that a while ago they were able to take out of patrol and create this specialty unit of street crimes. And now they're realizing that in order to meet the needs of the calls for service, they need to bring those officers back into patrol. It's also a fiscal issue as well, where as the shorter we get in officers, we were spending more and more on overtime, and the commanders are well aware of that. And so putting these officers back into the patrol, the patrol side of the precincts, will hopefully allow to better response time for calls for service and less overtime expenditures.
What's the average time for a wait when there's an emergency call?
Oh, an emergency. You know what? I'll have to find out exactly where we are right now. It depends on the level of call, because we have, there's the priorities 1s, 2s, 3s, and I think it goes all the way down to like a 7, which is basically, I need you to come pick up a photograph of something like that. That can wait for a long time. But I will get back what our response times are for you.
Okay. What's being lost by doing this because of the officer shortage?
So it's the ability of those officers to basically take and specifically focus on like the street level drug dealing and stuff that those street crimes units were focusing on. That doesn't mean it won't be done at all. It just won't be done quite on that level because the officers will be taking calls for service as well.
Is it anything that the public would notice?
You might. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that you probably saw the street crimes officers out there a lot. They were out there, but they may not always look like, in uniform. So you actually may see some changes. And obviously when complaints and stuff are coming in and that office would handle that, those are now going to go back out into patrol.
There's been some criticism, primarily Commissioner Hardesty, who says that's what should be done. In other words, to make do with what you have, not want additional officers or to even fill empty positions.
Correct.
So in other words, by doing that, is there really anything that's going to be really lost, big picture?
Well, the more times that we have to make that decision to fold specialty units or decrease specialty units so that we can do basically our core function is to respond to calls for service, there's less proactive police work, there's less intervention from those specialty units. So as we are faced with more staffing, you will see, take for example I'm blanking out on the unit that I'm trying to think of, but you'll see that where they're not able to take that specific time, their 10-hour shift, and devote it to the issues that they were addressing before. So yes, there will be changes. What
else is on the horizon in terms of making do with under the shortage of officers right now?
And that just depends on how many folks that retire and how many folks we hire. We're constantly evaluating that. And as more people are hired, we're hoping that eventually we can bring these types of units back. But basically every unit, we're trying to distribute this equally, will continue to shrink and shrink and shrink.
Do you anticipate in the next couple of months, though, doing more of this?
It depends. It really does depend on how many officers we do have retire and what our calls for service look like. So we have a staffing tool now that's helping us allocate our resources as best as possible, but our core function is calls for service, and that's what we have to respond to. And I have to make sure that the precincts are staffed at a level that they can do that.
Your predecessor changed the requirements in terms of somebody applying for an officer position. Has that had any effect in terms of who's coming in and is qualified?
Yes, so it's had significant impact, positive impact. And I want to make it very clear that we did not lower our hiring standards. We widened the pool of applicants that can apply. So when I was hired, you had to have a 4-year degree to get hired. Just before I was hired, you didn't have to have that. You had to have a high school diploma or a GED. And we have varied up and down throughout my career on what the education requirements are. And what we realized is that there's a lot of fantastic people out there who make excellent officers that have not gone to college. And so we have not lowered the caliber of the person that we are accepting as far as applicants, but we have broadened the pool. The same thing with the tattoos. So that was another thing when we did the education thing, is we said that tattoos above the neck would be on a case-to-case basis, because what we realized is that tattoos are a lot more acceptable now in community than they used to be, and we had people who were getting maybe a small tattoo behind their ear, or something maybe just slightly visible above their collar, but not in any way offensive, and they were being disqualified from us. And then they were going and they were working for other agencies, and they're doing a great job. So I don't want to limit the people that can apply here, but I want to make it very clear we didn't lower the caliber of the people we're hiring.
Switching to a different topic, in the legislature, there's a bill now to move forward with something, again, the predecessor was trying to get, and the mayor was trying to get, was to make it a penalty that you couldn't have a mask when doing a crime. What's your take on that?
So my take on that is, if you're going to come down to the city of Portland and you want to wear a mask and you want to engage in lawful activity, I don't mind. If you want to come down to Portland and your sole reason to come down here is to commit crime and you want to wear a mask to do that, I think there should be an increased penalty for that.
So are you going to support it? Would you testify?
I don't know enough about it. I just heard about it yesterday, so I'd have to read basically what the bill is and how they think it would be effective and what the limitations are and that kind of stuff. But if there's something, because if you're coming down here with the intent to commit a crime and you're concealing your face to do that by wearing a mask, I do support having an enhanced penalty for that.
In the area of the protests and all, there was sort of a time where things went back and forth in terms of how strong the response was to protests, and things, once it became more of an aggressive stance, I guess. Oh, that's sort of an interesting word to use, but the department under, I guess the mayor's, I'm not sure you call it, but
yeah.
But the fact that things started to get reined in a lot more than they were initially with this, and that seemed to be pretty successful in terms of stopping the violence that we saw. Do you subscribe to keeping with that, with a more aggressive stance in terms of stopping protesters and violence before it gets out of hand?
I think a lot of it, more as opposed to us being like aggressive, is the resources that we dedicate to those things. So if you take August 17th, for example, we brought in a lot of resources. We brought in other city bureaus, we brought in outside agencies, and we used our bureau liaison teams to try to interact with as many of the groups as we can. And I think it's that proactive piece that we've been developing and getting better and better and better at. And then our messaging too, where we were very clear that if you're coming down to the city of Portland to engage in lawful activity, to express your rights, then we 100% support that. If you're coming down here to engage in criminal activity and intertwine yourself with groups that you may not be associated with, we don't support that, and criminal activity will be addressed by the Portland Police Bureau.
Two other areas. Gun violence has gone up here in the city. What's the plan to address that? Because it's not always that you know who's going to do it beforehand.
Right, but that's the piece that we're trying to really work on, is the intervention piece. So we have the investigative piece. We have our gun violence reduction team, our detectives and our officers that do that, and they do a great job with the investigations. We need to do what we can to prevent those incidents from occurring. And so what I've been asking for is, when we've identified the folks who we feel are at risk for becoming a suspect or a victim, is that we have the resources available to provide to them. So we've been working with the Office of Youth Violence Prevention and working on enhancing all of the resources that they have, so that when we identify these folks, we're able to get to them before the incident occurs, to prevent that next shooting, to prevent any retaliation, and really work with them to, once we've identified, let's say, someone who we feel is at risk of being a victim, we want to be able to pass that off to another resource where they can basically wrap around that person, give them everything possible to prevent that next incident.
Homelessness.
Yep.
We're still seeing an increase in homelessness of people out on the street,
Mm-hmm.
And then there's been the whole back and forth whether officers should be the ones responding, mental health workers.
Right.
Is there anything concrete that you see happening in the next few months that will change the role of the officers out there on the streets?
Well, I believe that there is going to be a pilot for the Portland Street Response, and that's going to be piloted out of the Fire Bureau, and that's where a member of their bureau will partner with a mental health professional and I don't know the details of who that is, to respond to some of these types of calls. I know that there are folks who feel that they should respond to all, but there's also a safety component, and we need to make sure that we're dispatching everybody to calls that are safe for them to respond to. So I think the pilot program is really going to help us develop that protocol for what is safe for these folks to go to. I think everybody realizes that sending a police officer is not always the best option. Sometimes it's the only option, and the officers do a fantastic job when they get there. But if there's somebody else who can handle that call for service, then I think that's a good idea as well.
How are we doing on time?
You have about four more minutes, so if you wanted to do
Great.
a
Let's
like,
get some
maybe
All right.
tour, and we can get the next